This is our first week together online, so um, I'm going to send you these each week as kind of a preview reflection recording, hopefully not too terribly long and intrusive on your week because I know you're busy. But I would like them for them to be helpful, so hoping they will be. I usually do these in my online classes, and the students report that they are helpful, so I'm hoping they will be for you too. Um, the first thing I usually do is preview the week and let you see kind of what we're doing and maybe point a few things out along the way. And since this is week one, this is probably a little longer than the other weeks will be, but hopefully that will be okay. So this week, basically, you have reading reflections to do. These reading reflections assignments, I'm going to open this document here. So these reading reflections assignments, you can see there's 15 of them at 1 point each. And then you've got a list of questions to answer, some things to think about formatting, and you can notice the criteria for grading. It's 0.5, 0.5, and then a total of 1. So it's really not graded based on your correct answers. It's more that there's evidence that you read everything and you thought about it. So that's how I would describe that. So hopefully that's pretty simple and straightforward, and you've probably done them in other classes, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but I have other reading reflection formats that we could use if you find this one isn't as helpful to you, so just let me know. So this week we're going to be looking at 3 readings. I'm going to open them up. This particular reading is about inclusive practices, and inclusive practices have become central to early childhood lesson planning and all the things you'll be doing this semester. So they were always inclusive once IEPs were mandated by law and that kind of thing, but they weren't always inclusive in terms of identity and diversity and justice, the things here, activism. So I really appreciate that the article breaks that down for you. One thing I wanted to point out is that it does mention that you're helping children understand how to interact with people who look like them and who don't look like them, basically. This diverse backgrounds piece is really important because knowing how to do that in a lesson plan is actually not something that everybody understands initially, because frankly it may or may not have been part of your own education. So as we go, if you want examples of that, or when you turn your lesson plans in for this class, I may help you with that, because I don't expect that you will automatically know it, because it's not really something that most people have experienced, unfortunately. So that's something I wanted to point out about that article that I thought was actually really good and really important. So I'm going to X out of that. And then you have these developmentally appropriate practices from the NAEYC standards. And these were recently updated to bring them into some realms of being culturally appropriate. And again, what that actually looks like and means, and you can see cultural misunderstandings. So this is something that probably your generation maybe had better experiences with growing up, but still we need far more of it. So I wanted you to really pay attention to some of these pieces that are new, really, like technology. That was not something in the NAEYC DAP standards in the past. So I like this because it does allow you to update the study of that. I think it's really important. So just be aware of that while you're reading. Then you have another document from the NAEYC. This is their official position statement. You can see, whoa, it's quite long. It's 43 pages long, but a lot of those are citations. You'll be happy to know. However, given, as you can see, a lot of this is glossary, but you can see that they have made a lot of changes. So in this appendix, history and context, I would pay close attention to what they changed. I think what they had in place, you probably have a pretty good understanding of just from taking courses about developmentally appropriate practice. You can kind of skim through some of these, like I think read this recommendation for schools and so forth. You may not need to know as much about higher ed unless you plan to go into teaching at the college level. You might be interested. You should know about policy making. You should know what laws are affecting early childhood because there are lots of them. The rest of this, I would say you should read and just be very familiar with. It's not something I would ever test anybody on. But mainly what I want to point out here is that you notice it's April 2020 here. They did do a major update in this version. They changed a lot. So I want to just point that out. And so be on the lookout for things maybe that seem different than what you understood them to be before, if you've studied them before. If you have not looked at these before in any courses, this is something you should really be very familiar with and know well. Not enough to memorize, I don't mean it that way, but have a really solid understanding of, so that when you go into spaces to observe and do practices and you look at creating lesson plans in particular, this will be the standard you'll be held to. So good to know it really well. Okay, so I would say that's pretty much my take on what you're looking at. Your topics are professionalism, developmentally appropriate practice, being an intentional teacher, creating an inclusive classroom, which is basically everything I just talked about. So I hope that that all seems clear to you. You have your reading reflection page then after you read, and then I will add each week. Those of you who have had me in class before, you know I do this, but if you have not had me, I use a class closeout form at the end of every session in person. So for my online classes, I do use a discussion board closeout form. And it's a little different than the in-person form for those of you who've done them before. So just, basically, I'm telling you why I believe in these. The research does show that if you take a moment to just reflect quickly on what you've just read or learned or been an experience you've had, you are more likely to kind of jumpstart the brain and give it the message that you want to integrate the information into what you already know. So it's like a jump start for the brain. But for me, it's important because I need to be very aware of how I'm doing as your teacher. So I read those very carefully and I often respond to them. My directions here basically are to, don't take very long to do this. It should be a 5-minute process at most, unless you want to do a long one. They don't need to be in complete sentences necessarily, but I do need to be able to read them. Your closeout questions are: number 1, after readings and listenings, to share a big takeaway. Number 2, after you listen to what I said, share something I said that, struck you, and any questions. And then what's something you did this week to take care of yourself. I really want my online students in particular to be aware of how much time they're sitting at the computer, and make sure you're getting up, drinking water, taking care of yourself. So definition of a big takeaway is anything you came to understand differently, came to realize how you could apply, or came to realize how much you already knew. Any one of those can be considered big takeaways, or you can make up your own definition of big takeaway. That's just to kind of help you. There's no right or wrong with this. Those of you who've had me before know that I'm just interested in what you're thinking about and learning, and any questions that you have. The questions can be about the content, but they can also just be general questions. It's a good way to communicate with me, maybe even communicate with your classmates in this, because other people will read your replies, and maybe you guys could be answering each other's questions, which would be great, because sometimes, or actually a lot of times, students can help each other much better than I can help them. Okay, so have a great week. Be in touch with me if you need to be. And I look forward to a really great semester with you. Your placement information was shared with me last week, and we're waiting on one school to be added, DePaul School, because they're going to fill out an affiliation agreement. So I don't know where you are in the process with the college about that, but they did communicate with me about it. So hopefully we'll all be hearing some things soon. If you've received information about your placement, I would love to hear about that in your closeout form. If you could just make a note at the bottom that you've been placed and here's where you've been placed. That would be great. But if you don't know, don't worry about it.